Our speakers today are Tom Brokaw, noted NBC TV newsman, Charles Overby, lecturer, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and director of the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics, and Curtis Wilkie, associate professor and veteran journalist with the Boston Globe. They will have a panel discussion moderated by Mr. Overby.
Let me begin. I'm going to preempt you here, Curtis, for just a moment.
We're already out of control.
Right. We've all known each other forever, but I just want to take a quick moment and congratulate all the parents who are here today, and I know this is a moment of great pride. Don't think of it as losing a child to the real world. Think of it as gaining a checking account before the day is over, so keep that in mind.
With your leave, Tom, did you ever think when we were hanging out at the bar at the Commodore Hotel in Beirut during the TWA hijacking that we'd be dressed in robes on stage at a commencement at Ole Miss 30 years later?
No, I thought if we were going to be dressed in robes, we'd be being led to an execution somewhere. We were there, and before we were in Lebanon together, which was a wild and woolly time, we were all over the American political scene as well. Curtis was a legendary political reporter for the Boston Globe, and to take somebody from the Deep South and move him to Boston was really quite an amazing moment. And I'm going to steal one of his favorite stories. The editor of the Globe at the time was Tom Winship, who was the quintessential Northeastern Harvard man type, and he was a wonderful editor. Curtis comes up out of Ole Miss, and he writes a great story, and Tom Winship comes by his desk and says to Curtis, "Young man, I like the cut of your jib." And as Curtis described the story later, he had to go look up the meaning of the word jib. He didn't know what the heck he was talking about. It's a sailing term. Good
Yankee expression. Anyway, you all have already heard an eloquent speech today from Tom, and I don't know whose idea it was, but rather than subject you to yet another speech, we were just going to have a conversation between three old friends and try to do it quickly, and maybe we can all get out of here before the baseball game's over this afternoon. Tom, let me just start off by following up on some of your remarks today. You touched briefly on the civil rights movement, and I know Tom's from the South also. He's South Dakota. But as a young man, he was based in Atlanta in the mid-'60s and therefore exposed to and covered the civil rights movement. And I just wonder, what impact did that have on your life and as a frame of reference for your work?
Well, Meredith and I moved to Atlanta when we were very young. I was 23 and had a very good job there as the anchor of the NBC affiliate, WSB, which is the most powerful station in the South in those days. And because there was so much going on, the network couldn't always get its correspondence to wherever the latest breakout was. So I was getting on a charter airplane very often at 11:30 midnight and flying to Selma, Alabama, or flying down to Haneyville, or flying to Americus, Georgia, to cover these stories that were going on. And I had come from a deeply, deeply segregated city in the north, from Omaha, Nebraska. In many ways, it was more segregated than things I had encountered in the South. We didn't have separate water fountains and separate facilities for African Americans. But for example, my wife taught at the biggest high school in town. It was the high school of Gale Sayers, right on the edge of the black neighborhoods. Not one black teacher, not one black coach, not one black administrator. There were no black clerks downtown in Omaha. When I got to Atlanta, I found that the contact between the African Americans and the Anglo population was much greater than it was in the North. That they worked together in different ways. Now there were great other kinds of separation, but I also came to appreciate the South for other reasons: the richness of the culture, the literary tradition in the South, the kindness that people showed when they were not involved in the demonstrations. So I've always counted the time that I've spent down here as something that was very rewarding to me in a lot of ways. And I said to my friends in the North, yes, what you're seeing here is representative of what's going on in the South, but you better look to your own backyards as well, because it's going to come north at some point. And the big part of the civil rights movement that Andy Young and others have talked to you about is that the network news was just then coming of age, and we were covering the civil rights movement. That meant all across the country people could see what was going on, and see what was going on in the South and then later in the North. And Dr. King felt strongly that it was an instrument that made his job not easy, obviously, but it did raise the awareness in the country. And so when they would go to Selma or somewhere else, he always made sure that the network cameras were in place. Now, that had a profound effect on me. What happened here at Ole Miss, what happened in Mississippi, that I think I would come back at this stage in my life and be a commencement speaker and then see the changes that have been made. I guess I didn't think that far ahead, but I really am encouraged by what's going on at Ole Miss and what's going on at what I call the tertiary level. We got a heck of a long way to go, as we've witnessed in the last couple of years, a long way to go.
Tom, let's talk for a minute about success and planning for success. Our graduating students behind us, their parents in front of us, all have these dreams of success. You epitomize success. You got the, not just in journalism, you got the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest award for a civilian. You're going next week to Paris to get the Legion of Honor award. When a few years ago you were sitting getting ready to get your degree, what's the secret? Did you have it on a yellow pad?
No.
What's the secret for planning and attaining success?
Well, I think to know what really drives you, what interests you. In my case, I wanted to be a political reporter. I wanted to be in on this new opportunity for journalists, which was broadcast news. People forget that Chet Huntley and David Brinkley were breakthrough figures. You know, when they came on the air and told the country what was going on, you could be living as I was in a southeastern corner of South Dakota and have a picture of the world that you didn't have before. And when I saw that, I thought I wanted to be a part of that. And I also knew that at that time that network news was eager to get workers. They were hiring people who had the kind of skill set that I did. Pretty good writer. I was pretty verbally skilled as well, and I was fearless about going wherever they needed me to go. And at an early age, the network kind of discovered me, and I was able to rise up through the ranks. It's tougher now, quite honestly, because generations of young people now want to do what I've been doing, and it's also, it is now gender neutral. When I began, it was just about guys getting hired. We've got 4 phenomenal women working for us this year who are our campaign primary correspondents. They're unbelievably talented. They're out there and doing it. On the other hand, what's available to these graduates now is the new digital world. It's not just the 3 networks or the cable operations or the diminishing opportunities in newspapers. There are all these sites that are available, and within companies, they're looking for people who have that kind of dexterity that they can do the digital world and represent the company in the digital universe. So there are opportunities. They're not as immediately obvious as they have been in the past. And it's a crowded field. There's no question about it. People are going to have to get kind of sharp elbows to get where they want to go.
Tom, your wonderful book, The Greatest Generation, you talked about kind of a collective group of heroes. Do you have any personal heroes, people you've encountered in politics, government, media, whatever? Who are some of your heroes?
Well, one of the things I learned in The Greatest Generation in an overall sense, and I'll talk about some individuals in a moment, I've got one very telling story, I think, is that that generation came out of the Great Depression. They were used to sacrifice, they were used to deprivation, they were used to working together because there was so little. And my parents would talk about jamming 8 people into a car to go to a movie. It would cost a dime, and they'd go to the movie in part because they could buy a set of dishes if they went to the movie at a discounted price. And they would come home and they wouldn't go to a bar or a karaoke situation. They would go to somebody's house somebody would play the piano and they'd dance and they'd do that. It was all self-made. The war comes along, and now suddenly they've got to fight the greatest threat to mankind that we've ever seen on this planet, and that was Adolf Hitler. And they lined up and said, I want to be a part of this. And when I talked to all the veterans, almost to a man or a woman, when I would say to them, what do you remember about basic training? They'd say the same thing. First time I ever got a really big breakfast. I'd never had a breakfast like that before. I got my first new pair of boots, or I got my first new pair of trousers. They were always hand-me-downs. But the story that I think exemplifies all of them was that there were 3 men who'd gotten gravely wounded in different theaters of the war, one in Italy, actually 2 in Italy, and then 1 on D-Day. And they ended up in a veterans hospital in northern Michigan. And they would lie awake at night, and they would talk about what they wanted to do with their lives. And they'd never met before. And they decided that public service would always be their calling. They wanted to give back to their country. One of them was a wealthy man from Detroit, from the Detroit area. His family had money. The other one was a poor, rural, small-town guy from Kansas who, when you see the pictures of him when he was a young man, was an Adonis. He was a fantastic athlete. He was a 800-meter runner in track. He was a football star and a basketball star. And he really was shattered on his right side. The third guy in that room was a small Hawaiian American, Japanese American, if you will, but he was an American. His family had been in Hawaii since the 1800s. And he had an arm shattered, his right arm, saving a Texas National Guard unit. And when he left for war, he knew that his cousins on the mainland were being sent to internment camps. So he wanted to go fight for his country, and his dad said to him on the dock in Hawaii, you may have to die for your country, but if you do, it'll be a great honor for your family because this country has been so good to us. So these 3 guys, 3 different backgrounds, are put in that room, and for 3 months they talk about what they wanted to do. They had a reunion in the United States Senate. It was Senator Bob Dole, who was a Republican, Senator Phil Hart of Michigan, and Senator Danny Inouye of Hawaii. I always thought they were emblematic of that generation. They wanted to give back. They believed in their country, and they also believed in working with each other, even though they were not all from the same party.
We know as we move through life that it is rarely a straight line upward. A lot of times we get thrown curves. We have obstacles put in our path to keep us from going where we want to, be they professional or personal or health-wise. What advice do you have for everybody in this room what to do when you get a curve thrown at you?
Well, you learn from every experience. I think if you don't get the next opportunity that you expected, you have to ask, why not? Probably the best thing that happened to me is I was getting married in the summer of 1962 because a man from Miami who ran a really big television news operation out there had come to South Dakota for a conference and saw me in Rapid City in the summertime. I was a summer intern, and I was on the air, and he offered me a job on the spot. And so we were counting on it. It was going to be very exotic. We're going to move from Yankton to Miami, Florida. And then he got cold feet for reasons that I later learned was that there was a person in that place in which I was working who didn't like me very much. He thought I was kind of a cocky college kid, and he was right on that front. You know, I was hanging out a lot in other places, so he wrote me down. He said to this guy, I don't think you want to go there, and hire him. So 2 weeks before we were to be married, I didn't have a job. It got pulled out from under me. And Meredith's mother always said, oh, it'll work out for the best. And I didn't need that kind of a bromide. I needed a job. And a great college professor at the University of South Dakota that you probably met along the way, Bill Farber, said, what are you going to do? And I said, I think there may be an opening in Omaha. And he said, okay, get in the car. We're going to Omaha right now. And he drove me to Omaha. And I walked in and talked myself into a job. I had a great mentor for the next 2 years. I was there for 2 years. Then I went to Atlanta. And I was at a very prestigious job in Atlanta doing the 11 o'clock news, and I was a nightly news on Huntley Brinkley almost every night. That man who did not hire me in Miami was on the phone one night. And he said, Tom? I said, yes. He said, Ralph. And I said, oh, isn't that interesting? Ralph, what can I do for you? Well, he said, my boss has been in Atlanta watching you on the air, and he's instructed me to hire you. And I said, you had a chance, Ralph, 3 years ago. And it's not going to happen. By chance, 3 years later, we were at the White House, Meredith with me, and they'd brought in a lot of local news directors. Ralph was a kind of a big ladies' man, and he was over at the cocktail bar, and Meredith walked over to get something, and I think as these two know, I have a very attractive wife. And Ralph turned and he started engaging her in conversation, wanted to know who she was, and she was kind of playing coy with him. And finally he said, "Well, are you married?" She said, "Yes. I think you know my husband. It's Tom Brokaw right over there." And that was the end of it after that. So you take the hits and you figure out where did I go wrong? How do I do better? Is there another detour that I ought to take that will prepare me for a job? But I was lucky because it was pretty much a straight line. I do mentor a lot of young people now, and I always say to them, keep your eye on the far horizon. It's not just what happens in the next 24 hours. It's what happens downstream.
Tom, we thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. You're doing double duty. You didn't have to do it. He said he wanted to come because he wanted to see Curtis Wilkie in a gown.
Yeah, right.
And so now he has. So thank you for sharing your insights.
Yeah, I just want to share one more thing. As the parents, you may be concerned about this generation. You ought not to be. They are the masters of what is going to drive communication from now on. There's never been anything like the digital age. This is the equivalent of movable type. This is going to change everything in our business and in the way you communicate, the way that you learn about stuff, and they know about it. They know how it works, and they're on top of it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the best advice I can give to them, quite honestly, is don't use it just as a tool to make a date. Don't use it just as a tool to engage in some gossip. Learn about the impact that it has and how it can serve you as an aspiring young journalist, and you can be the master of it, because it's not just a single blog or it's not just Facebook or it's not just Google. It's how we marry all those technologies and all those platforms for the greater good, and they're going to be the champs of that. So congratulations to all of you as well.
Thank you, pal.
Thank you.